In this section, we're going to explore Firebase. There are 5 videos that are going to make up this section. The video you're watching now, which is just an overview of exploring Firebase. Then the next video, we're going to create a Firebase database. Then we're going to have an overview of the Firebase database, the database reference, and the database snapshot. Then we're going to see how to save shortcuts into Firebase, and we're going to see how to make an event listener so that we can be aware when data changes on the server side. It can send a notification down to our mobile device, and our mobile device can take some action based off that notification. So let's start with this video exploring Firebase. We'll start with a bit of history of Firebase, then how to access Firebase. We'll discuss some of the services that are available on Firebase, and then we'll take a quick look at a Firebase real-time database. So first, a bit of history. Firebase started off as an independent project that was essentially the backbone of a chat application. Android existed before this concept of Firebase existed, and we used to have to do all of that manually. And it was a very long-winded process because there was quite a bit of logic that went into, am I online, then do this, if not, if I'm offline, then do this, and so on and so forth. So it solved a very important problem. So it was acquired by Google. Around the same time, there was a similar data storage mechanism called Parse, which, as memory serves, was a Facebook product. That was very popular, but ended up being discontinued around the same time that Google was really marketing Firebase. So Firebase kind of came in and filled that void. Now, as it's grown, Firebase is more than just a cloud-based data storage mechanism. It's what Google would refer to now as a unified platform for mobile developers. So in other words, it has a whole lot of things that can make your mobile app a whole lot better once you include this Firebase stuff. So, how do we access Firebase? To get to the web console, we go to firebase.google.com. From there, it will prompt you for a Google account to sign in. Then after that, you can create a project. Now, on the technical side, which we'll see in a video that's coming very soon, we'll also need to add a Gradle dependency to say, hey, I want to make use of this Firebase stuff. But we want to make sure that we register our application as a project on this Firebase website, firebase.google.com. So we log into that, and it will then take us to console.firebase.google.com. We can create a project, and we can start to use a lot of these resources in our project. So what are some of the resources or the services that are available on Firebase? I mentioned that it started with this concept of a real-time database, and that's our major focus for this section. There are many other things that it can do, and I've taken just a sampling and put them into this presentation. But the real-time database is still definitely very usable, and it's really nice for storing JSON formatted data, or data that can be easily formatted as JSON. Now, there is a newer storage option, which is called the Cloud Firestore. That gives us some additional advantages. For one, we can do what's called basically a shallow read, where we're reading just the top level information without reading everything going all the way down to the leaf. That we can do in the Cloud Firestore, but we cannot do that in the real-time database. In the real-time database, when we read data, it's going to give us a deep read of the data, or in other words, start at the top, go all the way to the bottom, give us that entire data set back. So the 2 ways we can store data, the Cloud Firestore and the real-time database. There's also authentication, that's kind of self-describing. Cloud storage. This is a question I got a lot with a real-time database. A lot of times people would ask me, well, how can I store an image? Well, it's really looking to store JSON data, not so much binary data. So what I would usually recommend is don't store an image in Firebase, but store a location or a URI of an image in that real-time database. So don't store the actual bits and bytes, but instead a URL where you can go find that image. So it's possible you could link these two together, the real-time database and the cloud storage. You could say, okay, the real-time database will know the address of the image. The cloud storage is where that image actually lives. So Crashlytics, here's a newer one. Crashlytics was another Google acquisition. I remember going to a Cincinnati Android developer user group, and we were talking about some of our favorite libraries that we like to use when we're writing an Android app. And one person told me he never writes an app without using Crashlytics. And that was before this was acquired by Google. So Crashlytics can tell us when our app crashes, and it can give us a bit of information about that. So you can test and test and test on your own device, then you might find that others out in the world are getting different experiences on their devices. And that's why it's important to have Crashlytics to be able to go in and do a bit of analysis and even post-analysis on some of these issues. A few other things: in-app messaging. Here's a look at the console for the real-time database in Firebase. This is for a course that I developed previously for Pact in App Inventor for Android. So in that course, what I did is I designed this little game where you could guess molecules, and you could also enter molecules, and you could save them. So the idea was, this game about learning chemistry, it would prompt you with something like hydrogen peroxide, and so you'd want to grab 2 hydrogens and put them in, and then a couple of oxygens and put them in as well, and you could say, okay, this is the atomic makeup of hydrogen peroxide. Now, that's one mode where you see the molecule name and you have to come up with its components. But one thought is, do we really want to ship this game with all of the possible molecules when molecules are being invented all the time, or discovered, or named, or whatever you want to call it? So maybe it's better if we crowdsource this molecule set and we let the chemists and the people using our application come up with the names. So for that to happen, though, and for that to happen well, we have to think of this game as more than just one Android device. We have to think about it as a community of Android devices that are linked together. And the way these things are linked together is through this central Firebase database, which is shared across all games. So what we can do, and unfortunately I don't have this hooked up to the Firebase database at the moment, but what I could do is say hydrogen peroxide, and then hit save, and what it will do is it will take these molecules that are in here in this molecule evaluation, and it can add them to this Firebase database that we see here, this real-time database. The real-time database, you see, it's kind of hierarchical in nature. It has the database name and then the name of our application that's using it. And then under that, we have a couple of things that I entered in here previously. Atmospheric oxygen, which is oxygen and oxygen together, and then carbon monoxide, which is carbon and oxygen. So you can see that it's storing it kind of in a JSON-like format, but we're not terribly concerned about the format that it's going to use to store the information, because we're simply going to store the information as a series of objects. And when the information changes centrally on Firebase, it's going to let us know by pushing those objects down to each individual Android client, and then the Android client can decide what it wants to do with that information. So that's what makes Firebase very powerful, is it does a lot of this automatically, and it even handles a lot of the online-offline synchronization scenarios.